Video coverage of the 27th JCT Traffic Signal Symposium is brought to you by Highways News, thanks to our sponsors AGD Intelligent Traffic Systems, Clearview Intelligence, PTV Group, Message Maker Displays, Smart Video and Sensing, SRL and TRL.
Thanks, Margaret. Good morning, everybody. Different company, different presentation, different topic. Something I'm not a little bit used to, so you'll have to bear with me a bit. I'm not really going to talk about technology either. I'm not really going to talk about signals. I'm going to talk a little bit about what happens before we get to those wonderful schemes that actually Peter has just been talking about in Hull. So how do we actually get to pointing the fact that that corridor is designated a cycle corridor? And how do we make sure that that happens? I've got a bit of a checkered past, TRL, AIM-Sun Ordnance Survey. Actually, all of it comes a little bit to fruition in this presentation, hopefully. So as an organisation, we're helping organisations committed to decarbonisation. We're trying to help accelerate that. I'm going to talk a little bit about technology that we use, and I don't frankly care whether you use our technology or how you do it. The important part is that you do what we're suggesting and that you reconcile some of the messages that I'm giving. How you get there, I don't really care, because if you do that, then the job is done. As an organisation, we look at decarbonisation. We look at what are the carbon outputs from a city. So we talk about transport networks. We focus heavily on those, but we also focus on energy. And when you look at those two, those are the biggest carbon outputters, if you like, from a city's perspective. At the heart of that, though, comes data engineering. There's an awful lot of data that those two networks produce, but if you don't understand your baseline, how can you improve it? How can you reduce carbon? So what we found in our experience in setting up in 2015 is that a lot of the tools that are available today aren't really aligned to actually that goal of decarbonisation. So we've been analysing data, creating tool sets, and we're using those within the type of work that we do. And the whole reason we want to do that, and this is the big one, because actually decarbonisation, sustainable transport, it's really difficult to articulate how you get there. You know, you just talk about 50% reduction in traffic and congestion. Well, how do you actually put a number on the amount of people cycling and how that then transpires back to road users and reduction in vehicles? I went to TTF in Liverpool and I said to Darren at the end, it was a great conference. It was really inspiring. But actually nobody talked about decarbonisation apart from the chief scientific advisor at the end on the last day in the last session. It was all about making roads much, much better for cars. Think about that. Yeah, even electric vehicle standing points, it's all about making it easier for cars. Okay, they're not emitting emissions, but it's still about cars, and cars cause congestion. And cars have a material impact as well because they cost an awful lot to create, and that's still bad from the environment. So I'm not an environmentalist, so don't worry about that. But I just think the point being is I'm trying to be a little bit provocative and get people thinking about decarbonisation properly. And so it was really nice to see that last presentation about sustainable transport. So the whole point is that we do meaningful impact, and that's what you happen if you take an evidence-led approach, and that's very much my background from TRL's perspective. So this is the presentation. I'm going to whistle through it quite quickly, and it's just some nice maps, effectively, but it's the point is that we're using data in our approach. So this is really small to see, and I hate looking at a presentation behind me. So I think that ultimately, in the past, road systems have been very much designed from a motorised transport. We're starting to see a trend as far as investment in walking and cycling and public transport that is starting to change that slightly. But for every pound that's spent on walking and cycling, there's probably another pound spent on electric vehicle networks. So we've got to really have that in mind. The business case and the ROI for justifying expenditure on sustainable transport is really difficult to achieve. We've got transport models that are very much focused on the amount of cars throughput through the network. But not many of them really have a cycle model or even a walking model. And if they do, how do we actually articulate that value of time, the business case and the ROI to actually justify spending pounds on road and cycling, on cycling and pedestrian infrastructure? We have local transport plans. Again, this goes back to the policy part that Margaret said that I was going to talk about. That local transport plans are embedded in local government policy, but they tend to be longer standing. They tend to focus on all modes, and they don't necessarily have the detail. And so this is where the local cycling walking implementation plans really come in, because that sets a policy around investment around the soft sustainable modes. So it's important that when we do LCWIPs, and that's what they're called, so I'll refer to LCWIPs in the short term. When we talk about those, it's really important that they're database driven, or sorry, not database driven, but they're data driven, they're evidence based. So DFT came up with a 6-stage process, which is determine the scope, gather the innovative evidence base, network planning for walking and cycling, prioritising, and then integration application. And these are all the data that we start to look at when creating an LCWIP. So the good news is that LCWIPs are quite short term. They really are focused about investment in the next few years rather than the next 20, 30 years. But it's important that we don't just take a local politician's view that it's just like, do you know what, it'd be really good if I connected A to B because that would make my life easy to cycle to work, or it would look good because of my constituents. It still has to be evidence-based. You know, is it flat? Is there a propensity to cycle? Does it connect A to B? Is there a demand? What does it actually give me? And that's where the data really drives that. So that's where we go back to, we use data engineering, and I'll whiz through some of these slides quite quickly now. So to support that, we built a product called Cadence, and Cadence streamlines that geographical or the spatial analysis. We have 100 national data sets already loaded into a database. We don't have to go and find them, we don't have to go and collect them, we don't have to go and transform them into a place that we can actually use. They're already there for us to use. We supplement that with local data, and then we start to use that as our starting position for an LCWIP. So this is exactly the process that anybody creating an LCWIP, be it a consultant or be it the local authority itself. There's nothing new here. I'm not actually sharing you some wonderful new feature or anything like that. And I really don't, as I said, it doesn't matter about whether you use this product or not. It's just the fact that actually it's the methodology that you actually go back to using good data. I was at a conference last week, I was talking to a local authority, and they said, the data behind my LCWIP is not very robust. And if you think that that's going to be hinging on your investment plans, then that's when you start to break down. So like we're traditional in that we understand transport models have to be good, actually our data in the LCWIP has to be good as well. So the 5 or 6 DFT processes, the stages for LCWIP. We use isochrones to support the development and the visualization, geographical scope. We consolidate that with local evidence. We share, we interact with stakeholders, we collaborate, we get local feedback. We might not necessarily live or reside or commute where the area that we're actually creating one of these, but it's important to get that local influence. We can publish the proposals for stakeholder engagement so that actually we get some more feedback from users and constituents. And then we put that into a priority matrix that effectively then starts to say that, okay, these are the best ones to actually focus on as far as prioritization. So, very quick look and walk through that process again in a bit more detail. So, isochrones. So what we've got is we've got a walk bus, walk, bike, e-scooter and bus. All the new terminology in soft modes and mobility, all in there already. So we can start to see how long does it take to go for, so these are all 10-kilometre isochrones, I think for bike, within Shropshire. And Shropshire is one of the LCWIPs that we've done. So those, how far you can travel for cycling. Interestingly, if you actually overlaid e-bike on that, then it goes much, much further. So actually e-bikes really do revolutionise how far you can travel from that sustainable mode. The other part that I should mention here is that cycling doesn't, e-bikes obviously are expensive, but cycling doesn't really have to cost you anything. And therefore, it really relates to one of those big measures about social inclusivity. So it's not just about the cost of doing this, it's actually about reaching to another part of the citizenship that actually have to travel and commute the network. So if we can make cycling better, then we cover a whole big nature of diversity there as well. So a very quick video. So this is the existing cycling network. We look at road collisions. We look at propensity to cycle, cycle parking, air quality levels, cycle mesh density, and deprivation. So starting to bring that is. We chose Sheffield because we presented this, or some of this, at a presentation in Sheffield a few months ago. Network planning, and if you didn't realise, the top of the slides, we're actually walking through the process. So network planning for walking and cycling, so you start to see very much like what you were talking about, Sean, about actually the cycle route connecting people from different levels of industry, from where they're residential. So you start to see, and it's great that that presentation was first, because hopefully it means that this makes sense a little bit, is that this is where it starts from, creating the strategy, the proposal, the plan, and then what it falls down into, then design of the scheme, and then technology. And hopefully that's why it's a little bit relevant to the audience, which is that we've got to get the first part right, and it's got to relate to the technology, and then it becomes a collaborative success. And then we have a publish function, which means that we can not send over a 50-page document with reams and reams and reams of maps that you actually look at one and you've forgotten which next one you've looked because it's slightly different, but then it's got complete different measurement in there. It's effectively being able to flick through that in an electronic way. Really important. And it enables us to go to public consultation. And then the last part is going through a prioritization matrix of cost, affordability, benefit, etc. So it starts to provide a really robust matrix for us, and that's what makes a really good LCWIP. An LCWIP then can be used as a very robust evidence base. The good news is this is my last slide. I'm trying to get John a few minutes back on schedule. So it was meant to be a rapid canter through. So if we just go through this, they all relate to each other. Local walking and cycling plans need to be properly evidence-based. They need to have as much time spent on them as a transport model does in order that we can actually get the robust measures from that. The data-led approach relates to DFT's guidelines, and that's really good that it all relates in that way. Defensible plans are used to then prioritise that investment. On-street intervention. And actually, you've done some really good examples. It's not just signals. But hopefully, you can relate to actually, if I start to do this, then I can start to move forward on the decarbonisation agenda properly. And this last one I think is really interesting. I presented this, a similar presentation last week, and there was a lady from head of assessment and appraisal at DFT in the audience, and looked her in the face and said, actually, the process we've got for LCWIPs doesn't require monitoring. So how do we actually then go back and say, well, actually, I spent 2 million on this cycle corridor, but then I didn't actually but I don't actually know whether I've actually increased my cycling, the amount of people that are using it. So if we don't know the baseline, how do we know whether we've improved it? And that's not part of the process. So actually, it should be part of the process. And then actually, we then get a cyclic nature. The reason that's important, not just because we want to spend more money on infrastructure, because I really don't want technology for technology's sake, it's because we want to make sure that, again, it goes back to defensible. If we've got a measure of success, then actually when we come to the next version of the LCWIP or the next corridor, we can go, we did invest, and we did get more people cycling, we did get more people walking, we did reduce the road users on motorised vehicle, and therefore our investment makes sense. So it's got to be evidence-based, and that gives us impact. So it was meant to be a little bit of a thought-provoking presentation. It was not meant to be about technology. It was meant to be a little bit about how does policy then affect what we do, which I think is most of the audience, if you like, as far as technology and managing our networks on street. Try and bring a little bit of a bridge of a gap, if you like, between that policy strategy to implementation. Hopefully that was interesting. Hopefully that was useful. That was me. And I said this last time when I presented that Margaret's not allowed to ask me awkward, difficult technical questions.
Thanks very much indeed, Gavin. Can we start?
Mark.
Mark.
Was that a husky Mark? Mark.
Thank you, Gavin.
Hi, Mark.
All the images you showed were urban. And
Yes.
you put up Shropshire and said, with e-bikes, those isochrones would have been a lot larger.
Yes.
I live in a rural part of Somerset, just off that Yeovil map that you showed. Would the isochrones have joined up at a meaningful journey level so that you had rural coverage?
So I did a bit of a project with Worcester, and I was looking at. I'm going to be a politician. I'm going to answer the question in a different way. We were looking at bus and walk within an hour, which we felt was the most that was at the limit of what you could put up with, if that makes sense. So it wasn't too bad, and actually it was really interesting. And it was with the access from public transport from rural conurbations to NHS provision, and there was gaps. And what it showed, basically, and actually we used that, so we used the same technology from a bus perspective. So to answer the question, yeah, in a rural environment, it's really important. The point being is that there was some people in the conversation wanting to put more bus lines, and we're going, well, how do you know where to put them, and what do you know, and the frequency? So you need to do your spatial analysis to start off with, so that you can understand whether you're actually going to get a benefit from doing anything with it. So I'd say the same thing from cycling, but yes, it's important. With the e-bike, you can expand the isochrones.
I ask because there is one bus into my village.
Yes.
It leaves in the morning to take people to the local college, and it comes back mid-afternoon to bring them back.
Yes, so you can't actually go to work in that time frame. Exactly the same as Worcester.
If I'm ill, walking to the local NHS is probably not a good move, because I'm already on my last legs, so to speak. So I'm curious about how we improve the lot for that part of the population in the rural environment as well.
So just to clarify, when I say walk and bus, it was 5-minute walk to a bus stop, 55-minute bus. That's the logic between the walk and bus. So it's not walking for an hour or walking for 55 minutes and then bus for 5. That's not what we were talking about.
Okay. Mine is actually about 45 walk, 10-minute bus, if I want to do that.
Yeah.
Just as
I think it's really important. The point being here is that if I have internet connection, I welcome anybody to come up. I can give you an isochrone from your village of any of those modes, and it'll take me about a minute.
I'll come and see you.
Okay.
Thank you.
So the point being is that but the traditional approach is that I've got to go and find the data sets. Then I've got to go and find a system that can do it. I've got to be a GIS expert. I'm not a GIS expert, even though I've done 2.5 years at Ordnance Survey. But my point being is that actually we've done it. We've built it so that anybody can use it, anybody can do it, and it's it doesn't need tuition. And once you've got that, it's that very first level of analysis, and then you can move forward.
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, Jenny. Hi, Jenny.
Thank you, Gav. That was really interesting. It's the first time I've heard you speak in your new incarnation, so it sounds as if you're happy where you landed, which is great. My question comes from my point of view as an absolutely avid pedestrian, particularly an urban pedestrian. There are pedestrian routes quite often which look completely logical and sensible on a map, but they don't actually work as a pedestrian route in real life because one segment of them is personally unsafe.
Yes.
Could be one of those horrendous caged railway overpasses, could be an unlit park, whatever. Is there a way of working that into what you're doing, or maybe you've already done it? It's a chance for you to shine.
Yes. So yes. No, that sounds a bit cagey, doesn't it? I don't mean it's not cagey. So basically, we have national data sets, and then what we do is we then supplement them with local data sets. So if there's a local data set of paths and tracks, or there's a local data set of non-paths and tracks, then we pull that in before we do the analysis. So the answer is yes.
Well, thanks.
Did I get away with that? I think I did.
Well, thanks a lot, Gavin. Another question.
Well, I can take it outside. I mean, I said that once before, and they thought that I was challenging the person for a fight.
Yes.
Yes. Outside.
If it's very quick, because I know we did start late. So.
Mark Roxford from National Highways. It's really more a statement rather than a question. We don't do LCWIPs. We're not tasked with that as National Highways.
Sure.
We're relying on local authorities' LCWIPs to tell us what the network needs to be for walking and cycling.
Yes.
And where our network has an impact on that. So please, please, please bring us on that journey with yourselves. Help us to understand those so that we can invest correctly on our network to support your LCWIPs and your walking and cycling plans.
Well, thanks very much.
That sounds lovely. I'm not quite sure what it means, but I will talk.
No, I think that is
to.
a very important point, actually, and I'm glad you've said that in front of the audience.
Yeah.
Because, the links between the national highways and the local authority responsibilities is extremely important. So thank you for that. Okay, Gavin, so
Lovely.
I think we need to move on.
Yeah, I'm good.